So this video is intended as a sort of overview of the words in context question type on the digital SAT, updated to include, first of all, this new vocabulary resource on my WordPress page, and I'll link to it below. But this is a list of 365 words that I gathered from an analysis of the 7 Blue Book tests that are currently available. So that would be Blue Book tests 4 through 10. They got rid of 1 through 3 recently and added 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then also the medium and hard questions from the question bank. And then as I elaborate here, unlike the previous list that you can find elsewhere on my blog, this new one accounts for words that appear not just in answer choices, but also in the various reading comprehension passages throughout the reading and writing section. Basically all passages, more or less, throughout the section. Focusing on words that are of that same kind of level that you encounter in the words and context questions. So not bringing in technical science words that might appear here or there, but words that you are likely to actually encounter in the passages and in the answer choices. And so you can scroll down here and see the entire list in table form. And so for each word, I have the part of speech, a brief definition, and a brief example sentence. And on top of that, I also have these Quizlet sets. And so here, this is the full 365 word set, same definitions and other information. So I have that, but then I also put together this list of high frequency words. So especially for those of you all who are under some sort of time crunch, maybe you're taking the test next week or 2 weeks from now, you don't have time to try to cram 365 words into your brain. And so this could give you something a little more focused to look at. So unlike the previous list, which I arranged alphabetically, this one is arranged in order of frequency. So you can see here, ephemeral, exacerbate, pragmatic, ubiquitous. These are words that crop up again and again. I have a separate video where I go over the top 10 words on this list in more detail, but here I just wanted to sort of point you to these different resources, and so you can also find the Quizlet set for that one. But then as for the actual questions themselves, and I'll say that these examples here come from Resolve Test Prep, and I'll put the link to their site below. I'm using these with permission. These come from the free sample test on their site. But as for the questions and the approach to the questions, while it is important to know vocabulary, you really want to have your focus be on the left side of the page, first and foremost. The biggest mistake that I see students make is to focus too much on the answer choices, which I'm hiding here, too much on the answer choices at the expense of understanding the passage. And to be more specific, the mistake would be to plug in words from the answer choices and then just sort of try to make them fit, as opposed to understanding the passage and fitting the word to the rest of the passage. The advantage of doing it this way is that you're more likely to zero in on the actual clue or clues that tell you what needs to go in the blank. And so this one here offers a nice example of that. So children's author Roald Dahl does something regarding the notion that books should contain moral lessons. He rejects it. So the word "this" is often a very, very helpful clue on this kind of question, because it's pointing and saying that's the word that needs to go there. I mean, yes, we're changing it from the noun form to the verb form, but basically we need something that more or less means rejects. And so when it comes time to look at the answer choices, we know exactly what we're looking for. And so refutes. Refutes and rejects are pretty close synonyms. Adheres to, sticks to, doesn't really make sense here. Endorses, that would mean that he supports it. And then bewilders, confuses, doesn't make a whole lot of sense here. But again, if you're proactive on these, you'll know what to look for, and the fact that you might not know one or two of the words won't really matter. And now, admittedly, this is a little bit more of a basic example. It's number 1 in, I think, Module 1. And so the more basic words and context questions might look like this. They're going to have a pretty overt clue like this. Now, a slightly more challenging example coming from Module 2 of that same test. This one also demonstrates a common sort of clue, and that's going to be the colon. Okay, the colon is often going to tell us, hey, here comes an explanation for the part that came before. And so if you have a blank before the colon, the stuff after the colon is often going to tell you what needs to go in the blank. And so it says here, this person, a cultural anthropologist and member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, has made some kind of contributions to American Indian scholarship. We don't know what kind of contributions, but that's what we're looking for in this second part. So she researched Native communities' health access, land use, and material culture at several universities before becoming the director of American Indian programs at the Smithsonian Institution, where she promoted indigenous art, culture, and history. And yes, I know those answer choices are over there, but we're not looking at those. Okay, so what kind of contributions based on this description here? Two things would come to mind. One would be like wide-ranging, because that does cover a lot of, territory, so to speak. But they could also just be something like important. And so I call these the approximate answer, or answers. And the idea is we're thinking, we're being proactive, we have something to guide us when it comes to looking at the answer choices. And so in this case, idealistic means focused on big ideas, but not necessarily focused on getting things done. And on top of that, I just don't think idealistic works to describe contributions. Invaluable, on the other hand, does work because it basically means really, really important. It might seem kind of strange given that in, the prefix generally means not valuable, but it's kind of like priceless. Priceless, so valuable that it doesn't have a price. Invaluable, so valuable you can't put a value on it. Something like that. So that would be the correct answer here. Questionable would have a negative connotation, and then reverential, showing reverence for something that's more than just showing respect. It's almost like worshiping it. Doesn't quite make sense. But this one, like the previous one, would be relatively straightforward examples, given that we don't have any contrasts, much less multiple contrasts. And that's where the things can start to get really difficult. But here, this one we can call a moderate example. And this will be the last one for this video. So it says, when creating a sand painting as part of a traditional ceremony, members of the Navajo Nation typically do something with regard to the designs passed down by their ancestors, but the same does not hold true for sand paintings created for commercial purposes. In fact, Navajo artists include deliberate deviations in the commercial patterns to draw a distinction between the sacred and the secular. Okay, so we definitely have a contrast here, as indicated by the word but. And so what is that contrast between? Well, we could say it's between the traditional sand paintings and the designs used in those sand paintings on the one hand, and then the commercial designs on the other hand. Okay, so if in the commercial designs they deviate from what? The designs passed down by their ancestors. Okay, so if we have that kind of contrast, that suggests that they would typically, at least with these traditional paintings, follow, or to use one that we saw in a previous question, adhere to. Okay, so we're looking for something like follow or adhere to. So we go over to the answer choices. Refine, that might be tempting, and that's the kind of thing that if you plugged it in, it might seem like it would work. They refine the designs passed down by their ancestors. But we really don't see any evidence that supports that. It's not about taking a design and then tweaking it ever so slightly. It's about either sticking to it or flat out deviating from it. So that won't be correct. Acknowledge, well, that just doesn't really contrast with deviate. If you acknowledge something, you sort of, you notice it, you sort of pay your respects to it, but it doesn't work here to talk about acknowledging these designs because it just doesn't go far enough. Replicate, on the other hand, actually goes a little farther than I would have anticipated with, these words, but it works. If you replicate a design, you don't deviate from it. So this is an example of how you can come up with an approximate answer, and it can still lead you to a correct answer that is not exactly the same, but it's still close enough. Given that these words are generally going to be fairly far apart from one another, in a sense. You're not going to have to choose between two really close synonyms. And then discard, if you discard something, you throw it away, and that would be more like the opposite of what we're looking for. If you discard the designs, you could say that's more or less the same as deviating from them. You throw them out. And that's going to be a typical thing that they do on the test, whether it's an official question or a well-written unofficial question like this one. It's going to, contain an antonym or an opposite if it would make sense for that word to, have an opposite. And so again, just 3 examples here. What you'll find as the tests get more difficult, say Blue Book tests 5, 6, and 7 in particular, I think are the most challenging ones. What can make the questions harder is not necessarily harder words over here. It's more complex relationships of ideas over here. And so as important as it is to have a grasp of the vocabulary and certainly those high frequency words, don't underestimate the importance of the left side of the page and of really being proactive, focusing on the relationships between the ideas and looking for the clue, whether that clue is in the form of a colon and the information after the colon, or this something, or perhaps in a contrast like this.